What happens when a CEO buys a pizza from his own restaurant and freezes after hearing what his employees really think of the place. Jared Collins had built his pizza chain from a single food truck in a dusty Arizona parking lot to 17 bustling locations across 3 states. He didn't have investors, no business degree, just a beat-up Chevy van, a family recipe, and 2 hands that knew how to knead dough. But now, 12 years later, he hadn't stepped foot into a location without a scheduled visit and a red carpet rolled out. Lately, customer reviews had started dipping. Complaints about slow service, cold pizza, employees being rude. It didn't make sense he paid above minimum wage, offered health insurance, and every manager received a profit share. Still, something wasn't adding up. "I'm tired of hearing it secondhand," Jared said to his assistant over lunch. "I want to know what's really going on, not from a report, from the ground." He chose the Mesa, Arizona store number 9. It had the biggest drop in customer ratings, but the manager Josh insisted everything was fine. Jared had never met the crew there. Most of the hiring had gone through district oversight the last 3 years. The stores had gotten too many to personally manage. That's when things started slipping. He shaved his beard, dyed his salt and pepper hair brown, wore prescription glasses with clear lenses, and swapped his usual button-up for a plain tee and cargo shorts. He'd been working with a local costume designer for weeks to make it convincing. Even his voice pitch was practiced lower, quieter. He called himself Greg, a freelance graphic designer from Scottsdale. No one recognized him, not the teenage cashier, not the shift lead taking orders, not the tired-looking guy tossing dough behind the counter. Not even Josh, who wasn't even there. He waited 25 minutes for his pizza. "Pepperoni and green pepper," the girl at the counter asked without looking up. "We're out of green peppers," Jared blinked. Okay, just pepperoni then." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away. He took a seat near the windows. The place was half full, mostly teenagers and a few dads with kids. The TV was too loud. The floors hadn't been mopped. A kid spilled his drink and no one came to clean it. Behind the counter, the kitchen staff bickered. "Dude, I'm telling you, Josh doesn't care." "He's barely here," said one of them, tall, lanky buzzcut. "He's got that other job, remember? Uber or whatever. He only shows up when the district guy is coming," another voice chimed in. "I've been here 6 days straight, no overtime." He said he'll make it right later. Jared froze, his hand halfway to his soda cup. "Honestly, if I didn't need rent, I'd be out. Place is a joke. And you know Grega, the new guy from Tuesday, quit already, said we were all miserable." The cashier, dark lipstick, tired eyes laughed. "He's not wrong. You know what Josh told me when I asked for a raise? He said, 'You're lucky we even kept you after your little attitude problem.' Like, dude, I've been here 2 years. He's never worked a full shift in his life," Buzzcut said. "He just dumps all of it on us. Then acts like he's doing us a favor." Jared shifted in his seat. His mouth suddenly felt dry. He looked around the store again. The light bulbs above the fountain machine were flickering. The dough bin sat open behind the counter. A kid in the back sneezed into his hand and went right back to chopping onions. His pizza came out burnt. "Here." The girl dropped the box onto the counter and turned away. Jared opened it slowly. The cheese was bubbled up and dark brown. The crust was black in spots. He stared at it, then looked up. A short woman in her 20s with curly hair and a bright pink apron came around the counter holding a tray of garlic knots. "Sorry about your order," she said, voice quiet. "I saw how long you waited. I made these fresh, on the house." He blinked at her. "Thanks," he said. She nodded, then turned back toward the kitchen. Jared stood, grabbed his tray and pizza box, and walked outside. The sun hit him hard. He sat on the curb, watched the cars go by for a moment, then took out his phone. He pulled up the employee log. The girl in the pink apron, her name was Denise. She was listed as part-time prep. He scrolled further. Josh had logged only 3 shifts this month. He stared at the phone, jaw tight, then looked back at the store. He had trusted people to carry his name, his recipes, his values. And they were turning it into this. He stood up, walked to his car, and opened the trunk. Inside was a small duffel with a change of clothes. This wasn't going to be a one-time visit. He was going back in, as a trainee. By the time he returned the next day, his name was Greg again, this time in a black employee shirt and hat. He walked in at 2 p.m., just as the shift lead, a tall guy named Tyler, was checking the schedule. "You the new hire?" Tyler asked. "Yeah," Jared nodded. "Greg, cool. You'll train with Denise for now." Tyler didn't smile. "She actually shows up." Denise looked surprised when she saw him. "You again," she said, half laughing. "Didn't expect to see you back." "Guess I'm a glutton for punishment," Jared said. She handed him an apron. "Well, come on. I'll show you how to keep customers from walking out." He followed her behind the counter, into the kitchen, and into the mess he was going to fix: one burnt pizza, one overworked employee, and one lie at a time. Denise pulled on a pair of gloves and handed Jared a clean set. "This is prep. Not glamorous, but it keeps the line moving. You'll be slicing, mixing, restocking whatever runs low." He slipped them on, the plastic crinkling over his fingers. She opened the fridge door and motioned toward a metal tray of onions. "Start with these. Use the mandolin, not the slicer. Faster if you've got steady hands." The kitchen smelled like yeast and grease. A fan hummed above, but it barely moved the warmth clinging to the walls. Jared nodded and took the tray, setting it next to the small workstation. The mandolin's blade gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Denise moved to the other side of the prep table and began folding boxes. "You work anywhere like this before?" Her tone wasn't exactly skeptical, more like she didn't have the energy to be impressed. "Couple of places," Jared replied, keeping his eyes on the onions. "Mostly part-time gigs." She didn't press, just kept folding. After a few minutes, a guy with a frayed baseball cap and oil-streaked apron stepped into the back. "Hey, Denise, we're out of large dough balls. They're still proofing. Won't be ready for another hour." He scratched the back of his neck. "We got a delivery order for 3 larges in 20. She raised an eyebrow. "Then someone should have pulled more out this morning." He sighed and walked off. Denise turned back to Jared. "That's Danny. He's fine when he's not buried, but nobody's been training new hires. Half the shifts are just people figuring it out as they go." Jared nodded slowly. "Who's supposed to be doing the training?" "Technically, Josh, but he hasn't done orientation since I started." Jared kept slicing. The onions stung his eyes, but he stayed quiet. 2 customers walked in. The bell above the front door barely rang before the cashier. A teenager with a chipped black manicure muttered something under her breath and turned back to her phone. Denise glanced toward the dining area, then looked at Jared. "You see that?" she asked, voice low. "That's not laziness. That's burnout. She's been covering doubles because Josh keeps pushing people out." Jared blinked through the sting in his eyes. "Why doesn't anyone call corporate?" Denise snorted lightly. "Who do you think corporate is? Josh's cousin runs half the district. We've tried." She moved toward the walk-in cooler and disappeared inside. Jared wiped his hands on a towel and stepped over to the front line. The teenager didn't look up from her phone. "You good?" he asked. She finally glanced at him. "You're the new guy, right?" He nodded. "My name's Riley. If anyone asks, I'm training you." She tucked her phone into her apron and pointed to a row of laminated order slips. "If the screen goes down, you build from these. Use the backup scale if the main one's off, and don't bother asking for help after 5. Everyone's in survival mode by then." He leaned against the counter. "Is it always this bad?" Riley looked at him, her expression flat. "Worse on weekends." That's when he disappears. "Josh, who else?" The front door opened again. A tall man with a Bluetooth earpiece and 2 young kids stepped in. "Hi there," he said. "Just picking up an order for Carson." Riley tapped the screen. "It's not ready yet." "Give it another 7 minutes." The man checked his watch. "I ordered 40 minutes ago." She didn't respond, just returned to the screen. Jared stepped in. "I can check in the back, might be under a different name." The man nodded. "Appreciate it." Jared walked into the back, found Danny at the oven, and asked about the Carson order. Danny pointed to a box on the warmer. "No one called it out," he said. "It's been sitting 10 minutes. Jared brought it out front. The man took it silently, opened the box, and frowned. "This is supposed to be half veggie, half meat lovers. This is all pepperoni." Riley didn't look up. Jared stepped in again. "Let me fix that for you. No charge." The man exhaled, clearly frustrated but grateful someone was doing something. Jared turned to the prep area and started building the correct order. Denise joined him halfway through. "You're not bad at this," she said, watching him layer the cheese. "Just trying to help," she nodded slowly. "Most new hires keep their heads down. You're different." Jared didn't respond. By the time the right pizza was boxed and handed off, the man had calmed. He gave Jared a small nod before leaving with his kids. Riley slid her phone back into her apron. "Don't get used to it," she said. "That kind of thing happens every hour." Denise leaned against the prep table and crossed her arms. "You ever work under someone who just stopped caring?" Jared looked at her. "Yeah, once." "That's what this feels like," she said. "Like we all got forgotten." A bell rang in the kitchen. "A timer." Danny cursed and pulled a tray from the oven. "The crust's overdone." He dropped the tray too fast and one of the pies slid off onto the floor. "No," he said quietly, staring at it. Riley looked over. Again, Danny didn't answer. He crouched, picked it up, and dumped it into the trash. Jared caught a glimpse of the order slip. It had been a double pepperoni. "Delivery, $35 gone. Do we comp it?" Jared asked. "Nope," Riley said. "We remake it and eat the cost." "Should we tell Josh?" Riley's laugh was dry. "If you can find him." Denise turned back to the prep table and began filling a tray with garlic knots. She moved quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd done it hundreds of times. No wasted motion. "You always this fast?" Jared asked. "Only when we're short-staffed," she said. Jared looked around. The kitchen was full of moving parts, but no one looked like they trusted each other to hold it together. Orders were late. Ingredients ran low. No one seemed surprised. Denise leaned in slightly. "You want to know the worst part?" He nodded. "We get blamed for it. The customers leave bad reviews, District gets the reports, and Josh tells them we're the problem. He spins it like he's the one putting out fires." Jared kept his voice level. "Why does he stick around then?" "He gets a performance bonus based on labor costs and profit margin. So the fewer people he schedules, the better he looks." Jared felt his stomach turn. He turned back to the prep station and started slicing olives. The blade moved steadily, but his thoughts were unraveling. Denise tossed her gloves and washed her hands. "I'm clocking out early today." "Got a second job." "Where?" "Catering company, pays cash, way less stress." She dried her hands and grabbed her bag from under the counter. "You're all right, Greg, don't let this place chew you up." He gave her a nod, watching as she slipped out the back door. Riley leaned against the soda machine. "You serious about staying?" "Why?" "Because most people who care don't last. They either quit or they get shoved out." Jared didn't answer. He turned back to the station and kept working. He stayed until the close. Helped mop, restocked the walk-in. Took out trash. When the last customer left, Riley locked the front door and tossed a stained towel onto the counter. "This place isn't broken," she said. "It's abandoned." Jared stood in the quiet, the hum of the cooler the only sound. He looked around at the mess left behind, the corners cut, the workers hanging on by threads. The next morning, before the store opened, he made a call to the district office. He wanted Josh on site by noon. No explanation, just make sure he showed up. Then he hung up, slipped on his apron, and walked into the back. Today, he wasn't watching anymore. He was preparing. By 11:45, Jared was already behind the line, hands dusted in flour when Josh finally walked in. He came through the back door in mirrored sunglasses, sipping an energy drink and laughing into his phone. He didn't notice Jared at first, just dropped his keys on the prep table and waved briefly toward the kitchen. "Morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was brutal." Danny didn't respond. Riley barely looked up from the register. Jared kept folding dough rounds, his posture steady. Josh stepped into the walk-in, came out with a Red Bull and cracked it open before glancing around. "Where's the new guy?" He asked no one in particular. Jared turned just enough to meet his eyes. Josh squinted. "You Greg?" Jared nodded once. He gave a short laugh. "Right, heard you've been pretty helpful. Denise said you're picking things up fast." "Trying to," Jared said. Josh clapped his hands once. "Cool. Well, let me know if you need anything. I've got some paperwork to finish up in the office." He didn't wait for a response. Just turned and disappeared into the back, door swinging shut behind him. Jared finished his prep, wiped down the station, and stepped out to the dining area. A family of 4 was waiting by the door. The hostess stand was empty. He grabbed 2 menus and seated them himself, pouring water from a nearby pitcher. The father thanked him. The The kids were whispering about the arcade machines in the corner, only one of which was functional. Riley met him halfway back to the counter. "You're not supposed to do that," she said, voice low. "They were waiting, I know, it's just Josh doesn't like us crossing roles, says it confuses accountability." Jared studied her face. "And what do you think?" she shrugged. "I think the machines haven't been fixed in 6 months. The carpet smells like mop water and half our tips go missing when he does the count." He leaned in slightly. "Wait, what?" "You didn't hear it from me," she said, picking up a stack of receipts. Jared glanced toward the office. The door was still closed. He walked over and knocked twice. Josh called out without opening it. "Give me 10. Jared waited another minute, then turned the knob and stepped inside. Josh was seated behind a cluttered desk, feet up, scrolling through his phone. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a stack of unopened invoices. "Something you need?" Josh asked without looking up. Jared stepped in and closed the door behind him. "I'm Greg," he said. "But that's not really true." Josh looked up, confused. Jared removed his glasses, then took off his hat. He watched Josh's expression shift from mild annoyance to something colder. "Wait," Josh said. "You're Jared Collins," he finished, "founder, owner, and until about a week ago, someone who thought this store just had a rough patch." Josh stood slowly. "I had no idea, no," Jared cut in, voice calm but hard. "You didn't, and that's exactly the problem." Josh stepped around the desk, hands raised slightly. "Look, I don't know what you heard, but this store's doing fine. We've had some turnover, sure, but the numbers are holding steady. I've sat through your morning rush, watched customers walk out, counted late tickets. You're not even here half the time." Josh's tone shifted, defensive now. "I delegate." "That's part of management." "Delegating isn't disappearing," Jared said. "It's leadership, something you've replaced with excuses." Josh leaned on the edge of the desk. "If this is about one bad shift, it's not one shift," Jared said. "It's a culture. You've got good people working under you, and they're barely holding this place together. Riley's covering your mistakes. Denise is doing 2 jobs, and you're padding labor reports while cutting corners." Josh's jaw tightened. "You think I like this? I've been trying to get support for months. This store doesn't bring in enough to justify extra hires. I'm doing what I can with what I've got." "Then you falsify hours, strip overtime, pocket part of the tips." Josh's eyes narrowed. "You don't have proof of that." Jared stepped closer. "Don't need it." "Not for what comes next." Josh folded his arms. "You're firing me." "No," Jared said. "I'm suspending you, effective immediately. District will finish the audit. If anything you've done violates policy, your employment is terminated." Josh opened his mouth, but Jared raised a hand. "Don't say another word, not unless it's to apologize to that crew out there." Josh didn't move. Jared turned and opened the door. "You've got 10 minutes to clear out." Josh didn't follow him into the kitchen. Instead, Jared walked back to the front, stepped behind the line, and called the team over. Danny wiped his hands on his apron. Riley leaned on the register. Denise had just clocked in, her catering uniform still visible under her black shirt. Jared stood in the center, no disguise now. Just himself. "My name is Jared Collins," he said. "Some of you know that, some of you don't. I started this company from a truck with a 2-person crew and a single oven. I came here undercover because I'd lost sight of what it means to run one of these stores." No one spoke. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. "I saw what you've been dealing with, and I let it get this bad because I trusted the wrong people. That ends now." He looked at Riley. "You've been showing up, covering extra shifts, stepping in when things fall apart. That isn't your job. But you've been doing it anyway. From now on, you're the new shift lead. Full pay bump. Backdated to the 1st of the month." Her eyes widened. He turned to Danny. "You've been managing the oven solo. No backup. I'm assigning another crew member to work evenings with you. No more flying blind." Danny gave a slow nod. Then Jared looked at Denise. "You're the only person who treated me like a customer. You didn't know who I was. You just saw someone who waited too long and got a cold pizza. You did something about it. That's the kind of leadership we need in training. I'm bringing you into the regional onboarding team, starting next month." Denise blinked, stunned. "Wait, what?" "You'll still get your hours here, but I want you helping us fix this from the inside. You've got the instincts we built this company on." She nodded slowly. One of the newer hires watched from the back, silent. Jared looked around the room. We're going to clean this place up. Maintenance starts next week. Equipment replacements, full audit on inventory. And we're bringing in a new general manager, someone who knows how to listen. Riley stepped forward. Josh, gone, Jared said. We're resetting the tone. Danny leaned back against the prep table. Took you long enough, Jared gave a short, tired smile. Yeah, they returned to their stations. Orders resumed, but something shifted. Not in the noise level or the speed of service, but in the way they moved, like a weight had been lifted. Like someone had finally noticed, Jared stayed through the dinner rush. He helped run the line, refilled drinks, and wiped down tables. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. At 9:30, after the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Denise walked over to him near the sink. You really meant all that, he nodded. Every word. She studied his face for a moment. Don't disappear again, she said. I won't, Jared replied. And for the first time in a long while, he meant it. 3 weeks after the reveal, the Mesa store no longer felt like the place Jared had walked into as Greg. The arcade machines were gone. In their place, a long wooden bench lined the wall for waiting customers. The carpet had been ripped out and replaced with sealed concrete, easier to clean. The overhead lights were swapped for warm LEDs that didn't buzz when the air conditioner kicked on. It wasn't flashy, but it functioned. Behind the counter, the team moved with a rhythm that didn't exist before. Orders flowed down the line, each person knowing their station, their timing, and when to speak up. The new general manager, a soft-spoken woman named Lee with 10 years in restaurant operations, had taken over the schedule and redrawn the staffing model based on actual foot traffic. She didn't make announcements when she arrived. She just walked in, tied her apron, and started working wherever the need was greatest. Jared sat across from Denise in the back booth during the final inspection. She set down the updated training manual she'd helped write and looked up. You really going to review all 17 stores yourself? He nodded. One a week. No more delegation until I've seen the floor with my own eyes. You'll burn out. Not if I stay present. That's what I lost presence. Can't fix a system you don't understand. She picked up her water and leaned back. You know, half the crew didn't believe you'd stick around past the first week. I didn't think I would either. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded note. The paper was worn at the corners. One of the new hires wrote this. Said she was going to quit before she saw you jump on the mop during closing. Thought you'd want to keep it. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, like someone trying to find the right words. Thank you for showing up. He folded it again, tighter this time. I didn't realize how far things had drifted, he said. You weren't the only one, Denise replied. In the kitchen, Riley called out a completed order and slid it onto the warmer. She wore the shift lead badge, now silver, rounded, with her name etched beneath the logo. She stopped at the soda machine, filled 2 cups, and passed them to a father wrangling a toddler. When she walked back behind the line, Jared met her eyes and gestured her over. You free for a second? She wiped her hands on a towel and approached the booth. I've got a proposal for you, Jared said. We're piloting a mentorship program, store-to-store rotations. I want you to train new leads. Riley blinked once. Me? You've rebuilt morale without a title for months. Now that you have one, I want to see what you can do with reach. She hesitated. I've never trained anyone outside this store. That's the point. You know what it looks like when a team's hanging by a thread. That's who we need teaching the others. She nodded slowly. When do I start? End of next month. We'll send you to Flagstaff first. Their weekend crew's been under review since February. I'll do it, she said. But I want to keep my shifts here too. Fair enough. As she walked back to the line, Denise looked over. She's going to be good at that. She already is. By closing, the last family had filtered out. The open sign flipped off at 9 sharp. Everyone moved with purpose, sweeping, wiping, stacking. The energy was focused, not frantic. Jared stood by the door, arms crossed lightly. Lee joined him from the back, carrying a clipboard. You're leaving tomorrow, first flight out. Tucson location, she nodded. We're stable here. You don't need to check in. I will anyway. Lee paused, then said, You gave them back their dignity. That matters more than any policy you'll write. He didn't answer right away. I don't want to be the kind of owner people whisper about when the office door closes. I want them to know I've been in the heat, heard the ticket printer jam, spilled sauce in the walk-in. Then keep your apron, she said. You'll need it. He smiled, nodded once, and stepped back toward the kitchen. Danny was scrubbing the oven trays, humming something tuneless under his breath. Jared grabbed a sponge and joined him. You're not above this now, Danny asked. I'm below it, actually. Missed a spot. Danny snorted and passed him a second tray. As they worked, Jared noticed the small things. The way the new prep fridge clicked closed instead of hanging open. The labels on every bin, consistent handwriting. The absence of tension. Denise walked past with a clipboard, checking inventory. Riley counted the drawer with another crew member. Lee updated the schedule for next week on the whiteboard. No one looked over their shoulder. No one asked if someone else was going to handle it. Jared rinsed the tray, set it on the rack, and looked around one last time. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was honest. And that was enough. He dried his hands, hung his apron on the hook by the back door, and turned toward the lot. The air outside was cooler now, the pavement still warm beneath his shoes. As he reached his car, he glanced back. Inside, the lights were dim but not off. Just enough glow to see the outlines of what they'd rebuilt. He got in, started the engine, and pulled away slowly. Tomorrow would bring another store, another set of walls to walk through. But this one had found its footing, and so had he.